I want to describe two, I would say, ideas that are rooted in the Megilah and in Purim, but which are not among the most prominent. The first is an essay by Rav Dessler. Now, there are many midrashim that describe the circumstances that are described in the Megilah and many Gemaras, and they don't all agree. Rav Dessler is choosing particular positions in order to make the point that he wants to make. And he describes a scenario that occurs twice with what he describes as the same lesson. You know the Megilah begins with a party that's Chashverosh threw for 6 months and then for an extra week. Chazal say that the participation in the party was a matter of discussion among the Jewish people. Some said, first of all, this Goyish king with all of his provinces, and as a matter of fact, vessels that were looted from the holy temple were used in the celebration. And the reason that they were used in the celebration is because there was the prophecy of Jeremiah that the exile would last 70 years, and then there would be a redemption and a rebuilding of the temple. But nobody knew exactly when the 70 years should start. And in fact, Achashverosh's predecessor, Belshazzar, had a calculation, and the date, according to his calculation, passed, which meant that the promise of Jeremiah was not going to come true for whatever reason, and he decided to celebrate. He celebrated by having a banquet and using the vessels looted from the temple, and that night he was assassinated. So, onlookers felt there must have been a mistake somewhere, His celebration obviously was not well accepted by the heavenly powers, so they put away the vessels again. But Achashverosh had his own calculation. And what he's celebrating in this banquet is the end of Jewish prophecy and the end of the Jewish dream of going back to the land of Israel and rebuilding the temple. And he used the vessels from the temple. So one party said, we don't belong there. From our point of view, this is a time for mourning, and certainly not a place of where we'll feel at home. It's something that we should avoid. The other party said, 127 provinces, everyone's going to have representatives there except us. How is that going to look? It's going to look like we're not loyal. It's going to look like we don't identify with the empire, with the emperor. It's dangerous to do things like that. Yes, we agree with you. That has negative connotations. But in the case of where there might be danger, the connotation should be put aside. So they had a disagreement. And they came to Mordechai, and they asked him what to do. And Mordechai said, don't go. And those who felt that there was danger said, look, Mordechai, you're a great scholar. You're in your ivory tower. You're disconnected from political reality and social reality. Leave dealing with attacks on the ground to us. We'll take care of it in the way that we understand is best. And against Mordechai's judgment and statement, they went and participated in the party. What was the result of their participation? Everything went on as normal. Nothing happened. There was no downside, no repercussions. Says Rav Dessler, if we had been there, what would we have said? We would have said, Mordechai's out of touch. He's just out of touch. You have to participate. You can't show yourself to be disloyal. And you see, there were no consequences for what we did. Okay, years later, Haman becomes the prime minister, and the king makes a law that everybody has to bow down to Haman. Everybody's bowing down, except, you guessed it, Mordechai. Same people went to Mordechai and said, listen, Mordechai, this guy is dangerous. He's next to all powerful, is the second in command to the king. It's very dangerous that you're not bowing down to him. Now, they said to Mordechai, tell us, is there anything in Jewish law that requires us not to bow down? We're not here to break any of God's laws. If he said not to bow down, we'll join you. Tell us what law is requiring us not to bow down. Now, as I told you, there are different explanations to what was going on. Rav Dessler's essay is based on the explanation that there was no avodah zarah, no idol worship involved in bowing down to Haman. It was just a political law to show respect for the prime minister. Mordechai said, don't bow down. I'm telling you not to bow down. And the other said, but Mordechai, there's no law forbidding you to bow down, and it's dangerous. They didn't accept it. What was the result this time? Just a decree of annihilation against the whole Jewish people? Again, Rav Dessler asks, if we had been there, what would we have said? He says, Mordechai is dangerously out of touch. You know, he doesn't understand how these things work. He's lost in his abstract Talmudic researches, which of course is anachronistic, but makes the same point. And the result is that we're all in danger. Now, says Rav Dessler, we, with 20/20 hindsight, we know that Mordechai was right. But they couldn't see that. This was the test. It was the test of Daas Torah. It was called Daas Torah. Daas Torah is Torah Judgment, Torah understanding, the use of Torah as a guide to how one should conduct oneself. And often, because these people who possess Daas Torah, often their scholarship is out of sight, and the ordinary person can't even appreciate what they know, and their understanding and the dedication. So when they make a judgment, it will not be obvious to everyone else why they made it and why it's right. But we know that Mordechai was right and they were wrong. That's one of the things that the Megilah has to teach us, that the Torah is the way that we have to guide our lives. That's how far Rav Dessler goes. I want to take the analogy one step further. He doesn't say this, but I believe, I have no doubt that if we were to ask him, he would say, of course, this is meant to be included. What turned the situation around? Well, Mordechai said to Esther she's got to go in and plead with the king to save the Jewish people. And she said we have to have a 3-day fast, 72-hour fast. And Mordechai said, this is in the Midrash, Mordechai said to her, look, the days of the fast are the 14th, 15th, and 16th of Nisan, which includes the night of the 15th, which is the night of the Seder. And it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to eat matzah. You're telling us to have a 72-hour fast. You're telling all the Jews in Shushan not to eat matzah. Now, if we are trying to beseech the Creator to have mercy on us, it's not going to help our case if we violate one of His commandments. Esther says back to him, if Haman is successful in his efforts to annihilate the Jewish people, next year who will eat matzah? And the pasuk of that is in chapter 4. The pasuk ends, Mordechai crossed over and did what Esther commanded. What did he cross over? So the Midrash says he crossed over his own Daas, his own understanding. He had a logical argument against Esther. She said, the danger is too great. Well, if Mordechai had, now I'm speaking, if Mordechai had the argument against Esther, a lot of other people had the argument also. You know, tomorrow night is the Leil Seder. Not going to eat matzah? She said it has to be done. Even Mordechai didn't understand it. Even Mordechai didn't understand it. Accepted it anyway. Everybody else accepted it also. No one did. No one opposed it. They ignored their own understanding in favor of doing what Esther said had to be done. This was the tikkun. This was the rectification of the double failure from before. Double favor before was to say, we know better. We understand better. We have a better understanding. We'll take care of it and go against what Mordechai says. Now, they don't use their understanding to oppose. And that's what turns it around. So there's a subtext here that Daas Torah has to be the controlling factor. When Daas Torah is to be the controlling factor, listen carefully, the outcome is as good as it could possibly be. That doesn't mean it'll agree with what you want, or what you expect, or what you're hoping for. The outcome will be as good as it could possibly be. You cannot profit from making a decision that goes against Daas Torah. That's the subtext of the Haggadah. It's something we have to take into account. Yeah.
Does that extend to, how far does that extend? My question is, because there was, recently the whole controversy with, vaccines and stuff like that.
Yeah, it extends to all public policy. The one who negotiated the surrender of Jerusalem with the Roman general who became the emperor was Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. Not a politician, not a rich person, not a person who had leverage. Was the biggest Talmud Chacham that was there. Applies to everything. So that's one subtext in the Megilah. The other thing I want to talk to you about, which will eventually get to the question of drinking, is a theme that you find in the Megilah in very many instances in a great variety of ways. Everyone knows that God's name does not appear, none of God's names appears in the Megilah. By the way, it's not the only book in the Bible for which that's true. What's the other one? What? Song of Songs. Shir Hashirim, also God's name does not appear. But it's the only two. And especially when we talk about this being a miracle, which we described, the Nes Purim, why wouldn't God's name appear in the whole book? And the answer is, as is very famous, Clusius Levi writes at this great length, and we've spoken about it at length, that the miracle of Purim is something which took place within the norms of nature. That is to say, the events which led up to the final salvation, each one of them appears to be a perfectly natural event, not remarkable or unusual in any way. And then retroactively you see that they contributed to the salvation. You have to say all these things that looked as if they were natural really weren't natural. They really were a matter of divine providence. So the theme here is things aren't what they seem. That's the theme. These things look natural and they really weren't. This book looks like a book talking about historical events, but it's one of the books of the canon, one of the books of the Tanakh. It has holiness. So the fact that God's name isn't there is just a way of clothing the fact that God is operating without it being obvious. In fact, as I think I only came to that this year, the book opens with Achashverosh's party, and it ends with, this is the king Achashverosh, whose actions are written in the book of history, and levied taxes on the islands and on the lands and everything else. There's a book about Achashverosh's some events in Achashverosh's kingdom. Within those historical circumstances, and outside the land of Israel, and with no open miracles, God's providence becomes manifest anyway, which teaches you that things aren't what they look like. It looks like the world is just meandering on with accidental, non-directed causes. It's not true. That isn't correct. We have certain practices on Purim that express this idea. People get dressed up in costumes. Now let's see. That gorilla at my door who's asking for money for the yeshiva, I'm sure he's not a gorilla, but who is he exactly? I don't know, it could be Ruvain from downstairs, it could be Shimon from across the street. He's dressed in a gorilla costume. Kraplach. Kraplach is a food which is a piece of meat surrounded in dough. When you look at it, it looks like a matzah ball. You know, it looks like just a piece of straight carbohydrates. You know, but it has meat inside. But you can't see it. Only when you cut it open, you see that the meat is there. So there is a theme here that things are not what they seem. I have a pshat that I came across. I partly put things together this year. It's well known that one feature in the Megilah is that a person has a strategy to achieve a certain goal, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu uses that very strategy to get the opposite goal. It's not as if Hakadosh Baruch Hu just uses his power to wipe out that strategy and put something else in its place. No, he uses that strategy to achieve the opposite goal. So when Haman is depressed by the fact that although he has everything a human being could ask for, Mordechai doesn't bow down, and he calls together his wife and his friends to give him advice, to complain to them, get some sympathy. So they say to him, "You're suffering because of Mordechai." So Zeresh, his wife, says, "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be built, hang Mordechai on the gallows, and go into the king, the banquet room, and rejoice." Now, you should ask, why is 50 cubits so important? Why does the Megilah mention it? And given that the Megilah mentions it, why did she care? If it was 20 amas high, it wouldn't work. 10 amas high, 30 amas high, or any arbitrary height. Why would she want specifically a gallows 50 cubits high? I'll tell you the answer. I mean, it's not mine, it's from the Mefarshim. The answer is she knew where the banquet room was, she knew where the window was, and she wanted a gallows high enough so that from the banquet room, Haman could look out the window and see Mordechai on the gallows, and then he'll be very happy. That's why she said it should be 50 amas high. Okay, they made it. Now, they go up to the banquet, and Esther points him out as the enemy, and the king is angry at him and so forth and so on. And Charvona says, Hine ha'etz asher heichin Haman LaMordechai Yehudi asher diber Torah LaMelech. Behold, one word, behold the tree, the gallows, which, the tree, the gallows, which Haman prepared to hang Mordechai at. Mordechai who spoke well of the king. Right? What does it mean, behold? Hine. Hine you can only say for something that you could see. She made it high enough to be seen from the window of the banqueting room. So Charvona could point to it and say to the king, look out the window. There it is. There's the tree that he prepared to kill Mordechai, the one whom the king spoke well about the king. And he says, hang him on it. So her strategy, so to make Haman happy with seeing Mordechai hanging on it, that strategy ended up that he should hang on it. And Haman should hang on it. That's an example of how Hakadosh Baruch Hu takes the strategy of a person and uses the strategy to achieve the exact opposite end. So I want to give an example now. I believe that according to certain ways of understanding the Psukim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu does this not only to Rashoim, to wicked people, he does it to Tzaddikim also. And I think it happened at the beginning of the Megilah. Because, as it says in the verses, when they were looking for a second queen after Vashti was deposed, Mordechai tells Esther, don't reveal who you are. Keep it a secret. Don't let anyone know who you are. Not obvious why he did that, but that's what he told her, and she was very faithful in keeping it. Now, what exactly happened there? Vashti didn't accept the authority of the king. She's a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. He is not a king in his training or his background. That's why he always asks what to do. That's why he's always afraid for his popularity. And when he gives Vashti an order, she says, not me. You're not telling me what to do. So I provoked a crisis, and Memuchan gave him a great spin. There's a spin doctor that tell him how to handle it to gain popularity by deposing her, and he deposed her. Now, when they set out to find a new queen, the plan which the Megilah tells us is, look for a girl who's beautiful and who will please the king. What's the point? The point is, the king suffered from competition. He suffered from a queen who had her own independent standing, her own independent support, and she refused to accept his authority. Not again. Not again. This one, she's got to be beautiful and please me. That's all. Does anything to displease me? She's lost her qualifications. I'll throw her out and get another one. I want maximum insecurity in my queen. I don't want to repeat of Vashti. That was the plan. Okay. Now, Mordechai tells Esther not to reveal who she is because she has kings in her ancestry from King Saul. She was related to King Saul. So, Mordechai thinks he's looking for a queen. If Ahasuerus finds out that she has royal ancestry, he will pick her because she's worthy of being a queen. So he tells her, don't reveal the fact where you come from. But the truth is that Ahasuerus is looking for the opposite. He wants one who isn't the queen. He wants one who has no ancestry. No ancestry, no brains, no money, no political connections, nothing. Just beautiful and pleases me. If Mordechai had told her to reveal her identity, she wouldn't have been chosen. By hiding her identity, he makes it possible that she should be chosen. The exact opposite of what he wants. But of course, that's what needs to happen. She needs to be chosen. Mordechai doesn't know that. He's trying to protect her, so she shouldn't be chosen. He has no clue that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hashgacha is going to make, years down the line, her to be the key to saving the Jewish people. So his strategy to protect her against being chosen is precisely the strategy that enables her to be chosen. It's the opposite of what he wanted. His own strategy got the opposite result. I believe that this is an example of where this type of using of the person's idea against him is something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu will do for tzaddikim also. The fact that the person is a tzaddik doesn't mean that his understanding is perfect. The number of places where people made mistakes, including Abraham and Yaakov and Moshe and others, and Dovid, there are many times when their understanding was not perfect and had to be corrected by events that took place. And this is one of them. So you see here again, you think you know, you think you understand, you set up a strategy, I know what's going on, I know what needs to work, and I know how it'll work, but you don't. You really don't. What's going on is really not revealed to you. And that's another example of how things aren't what they seem. The surface doesn't reveal the character of the things that are beneath. Yeah.
Do we know whether or not Esther went to the original party?
I can't dream that she did. I mean, she's Mordechai's first cousin. He raised her as an orphan, and according to some, she was married to him. So it's not conceivable to me that she did that. Yeah.
According to the pshat that Harvona was doing what was in his best interest, why do we say Harvona Zechotov?
According to the pshat that Harvona was doing what was only good interest, why do we say, now, pay attention to your own words, why do we say v'gam?
Well, yeah, I understand that. But why at all, anyways?
Well, okay. V'gam Harvona Zechotov. It's like the gam is a ribui. A ribui means something which you wouldn't normally have included in the rule is also included in the rule.
Well, but why anyway? Why Stam is included anyway? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because he was the vehicle through whom something good happened. I don't know if Shmuel Levis has a whole thing on Hakar Satov, where the Chazal talk about Hakar Satov, to an road that bit somebody, to the Mitzri who killed the Jew, to the ground, to the water. I mean, it has very many wide applications. Okay, but that's not part of the subject I'm discussing. Yeah.
Just to clarify or repeat, what exactly about Esther's identity would have made her, if the king would have known, would have not made her chosen?
What is it that was the main source of Vashti's pride and Vashti's strength to be able to resist and stand against the king. She's the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She had royal blood flowing in her veins. That's what caused him the problem. He doesn't want that problem again. If she has royal blood flowing in her veins, out with her!
Who's she related to again, Esther?
It's King Saul. Right? Okay, so now comes, I think, the really most deep of these examples. There's a Tikkunei Zohar which says that the Day of Atonement, which is called in the Torah by what name?
Yom Kippur.
Yeah, with or without the hay. Not Yom Kippur, not Yom Kippur ever. It's Yom Kippurim, Yom HaKippurim, plural. Day of Atonement. Why is it plural? Good question. Ask it around. See what you get. Take out Amikus Gallows and see what it tells you. Next to nothing. What it's for. There is a Meforish in the Shulchan Aruch that says it because in your generation and previous generations, I was saying we would say in the vidui, in the confession, we and our ancestors have sinned. So it's a double. It's a very interesting question. The Tikkunei Zohar says something astonishing. Don't read Kippurim, which means atonements. Read Purim. Just put another dot under the cuff. Instead of one dot, two dots, vertical. Purim, a day like Purim. Now you got it. Time to go home. What? Yom Kippur is a day like Purim? What could that possibly mean? Can you imagine 2 days more distant, more disparate, more opposed than Yom Kippur and Purim? It's hard to imagine a bigger opposition than that. And by the way, as you know, the words in the Torah are written without vowels, so the letters that are written in the Torah scroll could be read that way. That's not an accident. And now, this everybody knows. Everybody knows this Tikkunei Zohar, and everybody talks about it. I'm going to add something which I didn't see anywhere, but I think is true. There's a difference in logic between saying A is like B versus saying B is like A versus saying A and B are similar. The three are not the same. If you say A is like B, the picture you're presenting is this. B has a certain feature, and A approximates B. B is like A is the opposite. A and B are similar, doesn't put either one higher in prominence. Say the other one, it means they share some common quality, some common similarity. To say that Yom Kippur is a day like Purim means there's some feature that Purim has, and Yom Kippur approximates that. Doesn't really get all of it, just gets some of it. Which means that by looking at Purim, you could learn something about Yom Kippur, and also see where the theme of Yom Kippur is expressed more strongly, more consistently in Purim. That's what the words say, just in plain logic. Now the question is how to fill that in, how to express that. And I'm basing myself now on various sources, Rav Dessler and others, Meshech Chochman, his instruction to Shmos, to Sefer Tanya, and others. 363 days a year, a Jew lives a two-dimensional existence. A Jew, like every human being, is made of a soul and a body. The soul and the body are differently oriented. That's why there's free will, because there's a conflict in their orientation. The goal is to bring the body in tune with the soul so that they can cooperate in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's tension between them, there's a struggle between them that makes free will possible. The goal is to take two different and competing dimensions and to organize them, and ultimately to try to unify them in some way. 2 days a year is not like that. 2 days a year, each day is a one-dimensional day, not a two-dimensional day. And the 2 days are Yom Kippur and Purim. Let's think about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the soul day. S-O-U-L. The body's put on a back burner. Not only don't we provide the body with its normal inputs, its normal support, no eating, no drinking, no bathing, no wearing of leather shoes, no marital relations. But it's not just a question of depriving the body, it's a question of, as much as possible, removing the body from one's consciousness. Now here, I think we have to rely on experience and certainly not trust religious anthropologists. I remember seeing a description of fasting and such practices as self-flagellation. And the explanation was these people are afraid of some kind of supernatural punishment. So as to avoid supernatural punishment, they punish themselves. And they hope that the suffering that they have in punishing themselves will convince the gods with the supernatural powers not to take it out on them. Now, maybe that's true in the Congo, and maybe that's true in the Far East. I don't know. But it's certainly not true for us because, first of all, for a normal, healthy person, a fast of 25 hours doesn't cause terrible suffering. But more than that, you're not conscious of it as suffering. Your mind is filled with something else that occupies your attention to the extent that in the last hour, when it's the middle of Megilah, the most dramatic prayer of the day, no one's thinking 42 minutes to the Coke. That's not where your mind is. And you tell me, oh, come on, I don't believe that. You know, people have been fasting for all that time. Well, let me ask you, if it's a second sudden death overtime in like a Super Bowl, right? Are you going to go out and get a beer? No. Probably not. Probably glued to the screen. I'll tell you something about a piece of history that used to happen with people who read books. You can read about that in the history. Right? Now it's all videos and so on and so on. They get so involved in a book they can't put it down. Can't put it down. No, he doesn't want anything to interrupt him. He's been sitting in the chair for 82 minutes without moving except for turning the pages. His muscles are cramped. He doesn't even know it. Okay, that doesn't relate to you because you don't know about reading books. How about playing football? If you're playing a hard game of football, tackle, not what's this new one called? Flag, yeah, right. Give me a break, right? There's pain there. You're banging your body against other people's bodies. You end up with bruises, sometimes with cracked bones. You don't feel the pain because you're making yards. You're hoping for a touchdown. I know. I used to wrestle. I wrestled in high school and college. And in the last game last contest that I had, all of a sudden one of my legs stopped pushing. It just wouldn't push. And my teammates were saying, pin him, because I had him down. Pin him. And I said, well, one leg isn't working, so it's hard. Turned out I had broken my big toe. I didn't feel the pain. But self-protectively, my body wouldn't let me push on that toe. After it was over, after the bells rang, I won the match on points. After the bell rang, I was in horrible pain. But your mind is involved in the competition. You don't feel the pain. You can be distracted by something to the extent that other sensory inputs don't come in. Maybe you've had this experience. I had it any number of times. You're driving on the highway, and you have kids in the back, and they're fighting. It does happen. They do fight, right? And you're adjudicating and trying to stop them from ruining the car and each other and everything else. And then when it finally calms down, you think, what did we just go through in the last 5 miles? I don't have a clue. I don't remember anything. Because I was driving on automatic pilot. I'm pretty good at that, I didn't have an accident. But my attention was focused on the back. I don't remember anything of what I went through. So it's possible to focus your attention on one thing, and other normal inputs just don't make it to your consciousness. A normal, healthy Jew on Yom Kippur doesn't feel. He's punishing himself and causing himself pain to avoid supernatural retribution for his failures. No, he's connected to the creator of the universe, evaluating his past, making plans for the future, struggling to be as honest as he can. And this drama occupies him. And I have a friend who was in America, and he It was Yom Kippur, and when Yom Kippur was finished, before he could get home and make Havdalah and have something to eat, someone said, if I don't leave for the plane right now, I'm going to miss it. Could you please drive me to the airport? So he drove him to the airport. Okay, went how long to talk, took him there, dropped him off, came back. As he pulled up in the driveway, somebody else came up and said the same thing. I've got to get to the airport right away. He drove the second guy to the airport, and he came back. He didn't report that, oh, but I'm starving, I'm in pain, I'm suffering. No, he just had to drive to the airport, so he drove twice. That's all. I myself, when I was in Mordechais Yom Kippur, when Yom Kippur was over, we danced for 45 minutes before we made Havdalah. We weren't suffering pangs of hunger. We were in the clouds. No one was thinking about food and drink. So the idea that it's this kind of protective self-flagellation is simply a terrible mistake. So now, Yom Kippur is a day in which the body's on back burner. Your consciousness is a soul consciousness. That's what makes it a one-dimensional day. Okay. Now, what about Purim? Well, people struggle the 363 days to bring the body in line with what the soul directs, so as to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an integrated way. There are different degrees of success. There are two levels where externally, when you look at the person, you'll see perfection. Everything he does is what the Torah wants him to do. But that's only externally. Internally, there are two possibilities. One is that he struggles and he is tempted to violate and he wins the struggles. But it costs him. He's struggling and it's difficult, but he wins consistently. Like an athlete who's successful. Doesn't win the bouts because he's lazy. He wins the bouts because he makes a tremendous effort, and he wins consistently. From the outside, his activity seems to be perfect. There's another possibility that through his prior efforts in bringing the body into line with the soul, he has succeeded in attuning the body to the soul. He succeeded in reprogramming the body to the point where it wants what the soul wants. Which means that from then on, it isn't a struggle. It isn't a struggle. He's achieved the integration of body and soul to the point where they're both dedicated to doing what the Torah wants from them. And this, if you want to find a source that you won't object to about this, you can look at the Meshech Chochmah that I mentioned before, his introduction to the book of Shmos, of Exodus, where he says that Moses achieved this, and he quotes the Rambam, who, I think in the Perek Zayin of Yeshivat Torah, says twice that Moses was just like the Malachim, just like the angels. Just like the angels. Separated from the needs of the body is one part of his description. Separated. Body was not part of his consciousness. So it's not a bad thing. And now I'll tell you the source that you might not agree with because you're prejudiced. That's the Tanya. The Tanya distinguishes between the tzaddik and the Beinoni. The tzaddik for the Tanya is someone who doesn't struggle. Everything he does right, he does because the body wants to do what the soul wants it to do. The Beinoni, according to the Tanya, is someone who is struggling but wins all the time. I know it says Beinoni, you have complaints against the semantics, fine. I recommend you learn the Sefer. In the meantime, there are these two positions. Now, when you're looking from the outside, you can't tell who's who. How could you tell who's who? How would you come to know? Well, suppose that you canceled out the soul's control of the body. Suppose you canceled out the fact that the soul has the power to bring the body in line. Suppose you allowed the body to express itself on its own without exterior control. Then maybe you'd be able to tell. Because if the person's a Beinoni, if the person is struggling, and you remove the soul, the body will express itself as wild. Then you'll know that he's only on the inferior level. But if when you remove the control of the soul, the body expresses itself in terms of Torah and mitzvos and holiness and love, then you know that the body has been brought in line with the soul, because the soul's control, the soul's management has been released, and the body's expressing itself on its own. So by drinking, you could reveal where your body is, what your body is doing. Okay. So now, having said that, what's this got to do with Yom Kippur, and how is it that they share a common essence, and in what way is Purim one-dimensional? Purim is one-dimensional in a way that's more consistent, deeper, more perfect than that of Yom Kippur. Because Yom Kippur is a one-dimensional day because, listen carefully, because there are two dimensions, only one of which is functioning. You're still composed of body and soul. You have to push the body to the back. You have to have specific prohibitions against expressing the body. Because it's there, it's real, but you don't want it to be part of your consciousness. So it has to be pushed back. It's a day of two dimensions of which only one is expressing itself. On Purim, what you get is a vision that really there's only one dimension. Because the soul is made out of the body is made out of the same stuff that the soul is. Everything is God's creation. It all comes from one. We're monotheists, remember? That's very important and not obvious. We're monotheists. The same creator creates the soul, creates the body. They're initially oriented to be in tension with one another, to oppose in a certain sense. But the body has the capability of becoming soul-like, becomes spiritualized, to the extent that it becomes just an adjunct of the soul, just a vehicle of the soul, just something through which the soul expresses itself, not opposed at all, but unified in the sense of integrated into a larger harmonious whole. Here you have a vision of everything coming from one consistent source, not two opposed dimensions with one in the back. That's why Purim expresses the one-dimensionality in a way superior to that of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is two dimensions, one functioning. In Purim, you have this vision of the singularity, the harmoniousness of the entire creation. And by the way, according to Kabbalistic sources in particular, according to Ramchal, word for word, in the world to come, not only is the soul there, but the body is there, and so is the entire creation. Nothing's lost. Nothing is lost. Even the mosquitoes are there.
Oh, no.
They just don't bite. They don't sting. Right? But everything is there because everything that's created in the physical world has a spiritual root, and all of it is to play a certain spiritual role, and it all gets realized when it's there. So you get this much more profound vision of the one-dimensionality. And now I will say something which I say every year, which people don't like, and then people stop coming to my shir because they don't like what I say. And the answer is, if your drinking will reveal that your soul has been brought into harmony with your, let's say that again. If your drinking will show that your body has been brought into harmony with your soul, so that you are a living demonstration of the single dimension of reality, then drink. Then it's okay to drink. But if it's going to just give you a chance to be wild, then you're contradicting it. You're showing that there's full-fledged two dimensions, the singularity is not there, and they shouldn't drink. Now, having said, that's my prejudice. That's just my advice. Let me tell you what, in terms of the halacha, this is machlokes between the Mechaber and the Ramah. Mechaber, who is the posek of Sephardi Jewry, and he quotes the Gemara word for word that you should get drunk. The Ramah says, no, you shouldn't get drunk. The Gemara says, you should drink until you don't know the difference between Mordechai and Mordechai. You don't know the difference between them. Sure, drink a little more than regular and take a nap. And when you take a nap, you don't know the difference between them. I have been informed that on Purim, there are a lot of Ashkenazim who become honorary Sephardim for the day. Okay, today the Mechaber, okay. Tomorrow I'll be back to Ashkenaz. Well, I'm not going to comment on the halachic appropriateness of that. And I'm not commenting on what Sfardim should do. Sfardim have a Shulchan Aruch, and they have the Mechaber to tell them what to do, and that's their psak for their Torah observance. But for an Ashkenazi, for sure, you should follow the Ramah. And I think that the spirit of the drinking should be what I said. Newcomers to Yiddishkeit have told me many, wow, Rabbi, we discovered that the Torah is realistic because one day a year you can really get plowed. No, that's not it. That's not what the Torah is doing. One day, like say, one day a year, I don't have to be a Jew. One day, I don't have to be human. I can be an animal. Oh, it's so realistic of the Torah to give me that. No, it didn't give you that. Sorry. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to show something very exquisite in spiritual terms. My Rebbe Zatzal did not get drunk, and he told us not to get drunk. I have seen some great people who were drunk, and the love of Torah, the love of Jews, the people they were with, the love of mitzvos, the poetry of their souls that came flowing out, things which under other conditions they would have kept private, but on Purim, it's possible for these things to come out when your conscious mind isn't so focused on your tznius, on your privacy. By the way, in case you're not aware, tznius is a mitzvah for men also, not just for women. And tznius means privacy. Is a verse that applies to men as well as to women. It expresses itself in different ways, but privacy is it, but not Purim. If that's what it's going to show. It's going to show that love that expresses what happens when you're not consciously controlling and thinking out and planning and saying, don't do this because of that nuance and that implication and so forth and so on, sort of letting yourself go, if that's what comes out. So then that will demonstrate what needs to be demonstrated, yeah.
So are there certain secrets from the Torah that can only be revealed through the Purim connection? So to speak?
Are there secrets that can be revealed? I'll tell you, there are things which we have. I think it's Rav Hutner who has an essay. He says something really, really striking. There's a Gemara that says a Talmid Chacham doesn't go into where he isn't called. We learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, the Shekhinah is on the mountain, and he waits until he's called to go up to the mountain. And exactly the Ramban says exactly the same way. When the tabernacle was filled with Hashem's presence, he waited to be called. And it says of someone who goes into a place where he isn't called, a dog is better than he is.
Wow.
Terrible, right? Okay, now Rav Hutner says, what does Esther say to Mordechai when she refuses to go into the king? Vani lo nikresi zeshloshim yom. I haven't been called for 30 days. And Mordechai says, go in without being called. So what about this general idea that a real scholar doesn't go where he hasn't been called? Says Rav Hutner, not all the time. Purim's an exception. Purim, you can go in where you haven't been called. Purim's the time you can reach for things that are really beyond you. Really, you're not prepared for them. On Purim, you can reach for them. You can go without being called. That's what I said when I read that. Wow, what an unbelievable idea. So this is a way of serving Kosh Baruch Hu that comes out only under these conditions. It would be one day a year, that's all. There's a famous story, a very bitter, famous story. Chavetz Chaim was sitting in a Purim Suda, and one of the Talmidim was pestering him. I guess he was at least semi-drunk. And he said, Rebbe, I want you to promise me Olam Haba. So okay, so Chavetz Chaim tried to avoid him, and he kept pressing. I want you to promise me Olam Haba. Chavetz Chaim looked at him and he said, if you can promise me that you will never speak or listen to Lashon Hara, I promise you will sit next to me in Olam Haba. The way he thought about it, he said, I can't. He turned away. Chofetz Chaim said, I offered him the world to come. Couldn't take it. Now, I, in my small-mindedness, think at least he was honest. He didn't feel that he could make that commitment, gigantic commitment. Whether the Chofetz Chaim expected him to rise to the challenge or whatever it was, but that was like the Chofetz Chaim was taking him seriously for a moment and thinking, okay, here it is. Here's your opportunity. And he couldn't take it. So this is definitely one element of serving Kodesh Baruch Hu that you have here that, according to Rav Hutter, will be only once a year. This idea of reaching for something that's really normally beyond your ability. I'm sure there are others. I think you asked the right question. All these things have to result ultimately in ways to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Yeah.
I'm including this connection here of rethinking beyond your abilities, but also its connection specifically to Purim in that regard. What about Purim makes it easier to, or I don't know if easier is the right word, but allows you to go above the abilities?
What about Purim makes it easier to do this? I mean, I could answer you in this kind of simple, superficial way. She did it, she was successful, and she brought this characteristic into the world. We do have this concept of the first person who does something brings the characters into the world, and other people later do it because that has been brought in. The ability to be a martyr comes from Yitzchak. Yitzchak was prepared to be slaughtered, and anyone who allows himself to die, because the Torah wants him to die, he takes it from Yitzchak. So this is something which she brought into the world. Mordechai instructed her, and she did it, and it was successful. That now is in the world, where you can make use of it. But you want more than that. You want an explanation in the Purim itself. Let me think for a second if I can find something. Well, of course, also she's going to have to reveal who she is. That's instrumental in creating the salvation, even though all this time she's been told she mustn't do that. So it's against at least the policy that she's been living with. I'm sure there's more. I just can't construct it right now. But it's a good question.
Well, also just the idea of, is it that the things that you're being called to do are more long-term commitments, or they're short-term things? As in, today, what can I do right now?
No, I think it would be short. It would be short-term. It would be doing something now that you wouldn't ordinarily do. You wouldn't be appropriate for you to do. I don't think that she ever did that sort of thing.
Examples of just, I'm trying to think of short-term things. The Lashon Hara thing, I know that would be, never listen to Lashon Hara. That seems to be a long-term goal. But it's just short-term goals to think about, or things to do immediately.
Well, first of all, you can have certain social relationships that need to be repaired, and you find yourself just incapable of taking the step. And to say, but I'm not prepared. In normal circumstances, I wouldn't be able to do it. But today, I can hope for success. I've tried to do it, and just throw myself into it without all the calculations and preparations and everything else, just to march forward. Whether it be in prayer, try to pay attention to mincha, daven mincha before the Suda, and then try to daven Ma'ariv before the following morning. As again, I'm not speaking for myself. My Rabbi said not to get drunk. What I do is what the Ramah says to do. Not always successful in falling asleep, but I do drink more than I normally drink. But I don't get drunk. I don't get drunk. Yeah.
Two questions. One question. What do because obviously like a lot of people get drunk. What do they say? Do they have an answer to the Ramah? Do you just ignore it?
I can't tell you what they would say, and I find it mysterious that they get drunk at night. Purim Suda is not at night.
No, but Rabbeim, not just guys. I'm saying Rabbeim, a lot, like everyone.
The Gottleib Rabbi said that one of the ways of fighting the street is to bring as much of the street inside that could possibly be. We have these big concerts with singers and people dancing and singing, and it's obviously taken from the Goyish sources, but you don't want them going out to see that sort of thing. So you bring it in, so they'll have that sort of thing. Would we be better? We don't really need it, especially during the year. Like, it's not as if they're having a siyum hashas, and there's big bands and all the instruments, and the music is all Goyish music. Okay, but it's done by frum people. It's done in a frum area, separation from men and women. So you're making it as, it's avoiding overt isurim, and you're doing the best that you can. So here too, in the context of the Shulchan Aruch does write it, and if you pretend you're a Sephardi, maybe if you put on 2 pairs of tefillin in the morning, so then maybe in the afternoon you can get drunk. I don't know. I don't really understand it. I tell you, I have a Masorah from my Rabbi not to get drunk. Period. He was very much against it. I'll let him tell you one little thing. And this requires a lot of other explanation, but I'll just give you a hint of the kind of depths that are there. Rabbi said to me one Purim, don't think I've forgotten about the modern Haman and how much he succeeded. On Yom Kippur, on Purim, he was thinking about, among other things, the Shoah. That's big. That's big. And he was celebrating. But he wasn't forgetting about that also. Anyway, this is just a little snippet of some of the depths of Purim.
Oh, yeah.